What is up, legends? Happy July. This is Baked Goods reporting in with another video. Yes, it's been a while. We will address that in the coming update video that should be out tomorrow. But for now, we are talking about 2v2. It is a beautiful day. The windows are open. The ceiling fan is on. The attic fan is on as well, which is what that dull hum in the background might be. What? A 25-year-old who does YouTube videos on the side doesn't have professional level audio quality? What? So, yeah, sorry for that, but we got a coffee in one hand, a water in another. Rosie is on our bed. Say hi, Rosie. She did not even look over. And today we are finally talking about the long-awaited topic that I have not touched on, despite it being one of the core tenets of the game. 2v2! Please hold the applause. After my recent experience at the Origins Game Fair in Columbus, Ohio, over not this last weekend, but the previous weekend, I discovered something, and that is a lot of people like 2v2. It was by far and away the most popular tournament format that people signed up for, and there was a small contingent of locals that swore upon 2v2, that said it was the best format and that I was sleeping on it. They said, Mr. Baked Goods, we need some videos on 2v2. And I said, all right, Greg, I'm going to make some videos about 2v2 for you, Greg, but I'm going to dox the shit out of you in the meantime, Greg. I have a picture of his last name. I'll pull it up and post a picture of this handsome man. To which his friend Roger said, oh, you know this guy? Who is he? Which Greg just said, oh, just some internet celebrity. So yes, today we're going to be kind of doing like a brief little foray into 2v2. We're just going to be talking about some introductory theory and analysis. And based on the responses I get, we will delve and dive into some deeper topics from here. So yes, the contingent I was talking about earlier, just want to dedicate this video to Dan, Phil. They are twins. Greg, Roger, James, and Joseph. They were the 6 people that did almost all of our 2v2 tournaments in Origins this year. And just another shout out to anyone else that's ever played in a 2v2 tournament that I've ran at a con. I'm sorry we have not given you the representation you deserve, but we thank you for your dedication to the cause, and the fruits of your labor are finally bearing seeds, or something like that. Also want to shout out my wonderful patrons. They help make these videos possible, and like your opponent's cards getting added to the vibranium armor, I too am collecting you cutesies like Infinity Stones. So thank you to Sad Royalty, Zero Skater 12, M. Ivy, Poindexter G, Poindexter F, Poindexter Q, Mitosis, Snuggles, Amberhead 2237, Hugo, Matt Rod, Sam Crane, K-Man 0050, Octo Puppet, Dakota Jabor, and also Lucio. Nothing funny about his hero card at all. So yes, the first question I want to talk about for 2v2 is, how does 2v2 differ from traditional? I say traditional because that's the main way I play, but according to some people, a lot of people exclusively play 2v2. Let's talk about what makes 2v2 special. First of all, all right, I'm copying the formatting from this video from the Adventures intro I did, and the title for that slide was Adventures is a Whole New World. So I was like, you know what? We're going to put another Aladdin song in the title, and I'm realizing now it's just like, I don't know if it really works. There is the section in the rules about how team play works, and the 3 biggest differences that I have set aside here to highlight is that it can only be played on 4-player maps. This seems like a little bit of like an obvious fact, but there are just some maps that do not support 2v2, and we must take that into account because you cannot play in a 2v2 4-player game on Sherwood, Yukon, Huron, either Paddock, T-Rex, or Raptor, King Solomon's Mine, or Azuchi Castle. These are 2-player maps that come in the 2-player boxes that just do not have enough starting spaces on them. Fortunately, The maps that came in the 3-hero Marvel sets are all 4 players, so that will still work. So it's just like a small handful of maps. What is that? 7? But that's probably like a fourth of all the maps you just can't use. So keep that in mind when you're trying to figure out what maps to play on. The other thing is that there is a set turn order for 2v2. Player 1 will be on Team A, and they will also have Player 3 on their team, and players 2 and 4 will be on the second team, and they will take turns rotating, so that is the same order every single round. Player 1, 2, 3, 4, and repeat. There is a nice kind of balance to the way that the teams function, meaning it isn't like Team A, Team A, Team B, Team B, because that would be very swingy. It's a nice even alternation of teams, and this dictates a lot of the strategy for 2v2, because a lot of times you want to try to take out one member of the other team so that you can create a 2v1. And so based on the turn order, that can kind of dictate on who your team tries to gang up on. We'll talk about this a little bit later. And the last and probably most important difference in team play versus 1v1 play is that when your hero dies, you are no longer out necessarily. Because if the other hero on your team is still standing, all of your sidekicks and other fighters get to continue battling with your teammate's hero, even though your team, your hero that you are controlling is no longer with you. So if you are playing as InGen with Bigfoot on your team and Robert Muldoon goes down, fear not, because your mighty InGen workers can still play cards that they could normally legally play and do other things. And hopefully they can assist, the sidekicks can assist the other hero on your team in avenging your fallen hero. This is actually super, super important because it adds, well, one, it adds value to heroes with sidekicks, in addition to them being super valuable in this format for other reasons. And 2, it actually has some like deck construction caveats, I should say. If you have a lot of any cards in your deck, for example, like Bigfoot and the Jackalope, Jackalope can use a lot of cards that Bigfoot can use. So even if Bigfoot goes down, Jackalope can still play all of those any's, and you would be surprised at how long a sidekick can persist in the game and aid the other team's hero. Because a lot of times the other hero on your team, I should say, because the other team will just look at your sidekick and be like, well, we don't really need to kill this guy to win, we just need to kill the other hero. And then you're just relentlessly bothering them, and they're like, all right, we should probably dedicate some resources to taking this little chud out. But yeah, that is huge. There are certain maps that you cannot use for 2v2 just based on their construction. They don't have enough starting spots. They're probably also not big enough in general, but that's kind of something to look out for a different video. There's a set turn order, which dictates the rhythm and some of the time strategy in the game. And hero defeat no longer means you're out of the game. Your sidekick can keep playing as long as your partner's hero is still in the game. So yeah, that is how 2v2 differs from 1v1. And now we're going to talk about how 2v2 changes the way we think about heroes, because you wouldn't necessarily think that 2v2 is that different from 1v1, but in fact, in a sick reversal of fortune, there are certain hero attributes that become infinitely better in 2v2 compared to 1v1. And just like adventures, we have to look at heroes through a different lens when thinking about them in this game mode due to the different requirements that the game mode presents. So yeah, let's dive right in, starting with the fundamentals. This is kind of like a no-brainer, but basically all the good things about like a hero's statistical attributes carry over to this mode. So there is a premium on move 3 and ranged heroes, because being able to move more spaces and attack from far away just gives you an advantage when there is a big cluster of people fighting in the center of the map. It helps being able to shoot in from afar and not have to get right up close and vulnerable in order to make an impact. And move 3 is always super valuable because 3 is bigger than 2, and until they make some sort of hero that's like deal 3 damage to the opposing hero if they have a 3 as their move value, until like that kind of, I don't want to necessarily call it like counterplay, but that kind of like thing gets introduced, move 3 will always be better than move 2, although there probably is some deck building that they design around being move 3 or move 2. But whatever, move 3, always better than move 2, basically. Sidekicks are something else that is also super, super valuable in this format, not just because they can carry on after your hero is defeated, like we just talked about, but having more fighters on the board, especially in a format where there's just gonna be a bunch of people, can help protect certain fighters on your team, especially if you have multiple sidekicks, being able to kind of control a lot of where fighters are flowing on the board and being able to block off certain paths or just protecting certain people on your team is so much easier when you have more fighters available. That's why solo fighters are typically less good in 2v2, especially just because they have less bodies to throw out attacks from, therefore can be kind of like funneled and corralled a lot easier and pinned versus heroes with sidekicks. One other thing I kind of want to just like briefly throw in here, but I didn't want to give it its own slide, is that area of effect damage like Never Leave the Path, A Handful of Pearls, Pure Evil, Lightning Storm, things like that are also very valuable in this format when you are trying to deal with a lot of opposing fighters simultaneously. Being able to hit multiple targets is extremely valuable in singular effects. And so I just wanted to mention that that type of effect is also very valuable in 2v2. The next thing I wanted to throw in here, and you might recognize this slide from the Adventures video, but draw power is super, 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 one more time, super important in 2v2. Just like Adventures, which albeit is a little bit more random, but in 2v2, there are more people taking turns in between your turn. In a 1v1, I take my turn, my opponent takes their turn back to me. In 2v2, I have 2 opponents going before I go again, which means if they are both attacking me, perhaps multiple times, I'm going to spend a lot of cards out of my hand. And if this happens repeatedly over the course of multiple turns, I will eventually have no cards in my hand. And if I cannot draw replacement cards for the cards that I'm spending to block, or draw more cards than that, I will soon be, as the National Wildlife Bird Association refers to them as, I will be a sitting duck. So being able to draw cards in a format with more enemies is important, because cards are attacks and blocks, and you can't do anything if you don't have cards. And especially, like I said, strategies in this mode revolve around kind of ganging up on one person on the other team to create a 2v1 for your team. You need cards to block, and if you cannot build a hand or rebuild a hand efficiently and quickly, that is a major weakness that the other team will surely try to exploit. And one of my favorite things about kind of like alternate game modes like 2v2 and Adventures is that because we're looking at heroes through a different lens, certain heroes that were deemed inviable in 1v1 due to excessive card draw Buffy sorry about that become a little bit better / a lot better in this format, because now card draw isn't a weakness. Games often aren't going to fatigue, and being able to draw a bunch of cards and have a bunch of cards in your hand makes you a lot harder to kill. So yeah, that is something that we kind of need to reevaluate certain heroes, especially those designed with 2v2 team play in mind. Cough, cough, Buffy set, cough, cough. You get the gist. But yes, if there was a single most important thing about a hero that I wanted to highlight for 2v2, drawing cards is perhaps the most important one in my opinion. But I am relatively inexperienced in the world of 2v2, so if you have a different opinion, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear from you. And the next hero attribute that I want to talk about for 2v2 is what I like to call multiplayer abilities. Cards that you can read them in 1v1 and it makes sense how they work, but then when you're looking at them through 2v2, you're like, oh, this card is worded like this because this can affect my teammates. This is cool. And a lot of these fighters come with interesting team building prospects when you're thinking about pairing them with other fighters and such. So again, Unmatched wasn't designed specifically for 1v1, and so these abilities exist, and that is awesome. So there are certain heroes with movement abilities like Muldoon, Willow, Tesla, Arthur, and Annie that have certain cards that can move enemies and or friends that are just a lot better in this mode. So Muldoon and Willow have Rending Shot, which lets you move fighters that you attack, which is amazing in this mode because making it easier for your teammate to attack an enemy, great. Tesla and Arthur have like global move everyone abilities, and Annie has Captain's Orders, which can move a friendly fighter, which isn't necessarily Charlie because your teammate and their characters are all friendly fighters from your perspective. So big movement abilities like this are amazing in 2v2. Restorative abilities such as the healing on Doctor Strange and Annie's cards, but also Willow has Resurrect, and I know Willow Raptors is a fun combo because bringing back a whole raptor is absolutely phenomenal. So abilities like this that kind of keep you and your team going and in the fight are insanely powerful in 2v2, especially Rings of Ragador. That card is arguably the best card in all of 2v2? Question mark? That's something, again, that's kind of up for debate. Attacks, Sun Wukong has Infinite Strikes, which gets +1 in value for each friendly fighter adjacent to the opposing fighter, which means, yes, you're clones, but also squirrels. Friendly squirrels that are adjacent to the opposing fighter. You can get that attack, up to like a 13? Something like that. Something crazy. I believe his is the only one in the game, because I know the Shakespeare card, Et tu, Brute, that is each of your fighters. I specifically checked. I was going to add Shakespeare on the slide, and then I was like, well, let me just check that wording real quick, and I was very saddened to find that it said your fighters instead of each friendly fighter. But there might be a few more attacks like this in the game, but that was the one that came to mind when I was making the slide. Discards. Now, normally discards are amazing. Cough, cough, Medusa OP, cough, cough. If you've been playing Unmatched for more than 20 minutes, you know how annoying they can be. Well, certain discards are even more annoying because Genie and T-Rex both have like mass opponent discards. 3 Wishes on Genie says each opponent discards 2 cards, which in free-for-all is absolutely busted, but in 2v2 means each person on the opposing team discards 2 cards. And Ripples in the Water from T-Rex also says that, but instead of each opponent, it's, I believe, each opponent who controls a friendly fighter that you're now adjacent to. I can't remember the exact wording on that card, but if you Ripples next to 2 characters from each of the respective opposing players, they each discard a card, which is very, very good and very, very efficient. And a new sort of category is buffs. Oda Nobunaga, his whole ability is centered around making friendly fighters better, which normally is just his honor guard, but in this mode includes your teammate and their fighters. People were saying when Oda was revealed and now that he might be the 2v2 GOAT just because of that ability, making every other fighter on your team better, of course with the caveat of having to be in your zone, but having +1 to their attacks and defenses is crazy. So that is arguably one of the best abilities for 2v2. But what I'm trying to say is that there are cards that function normally in 1v1, but in 2v2 they kind of like unlock a new use for them / make them even better. And Rosie is awake, let's go. And so just when you're looking at certain wordings on cards, you're like, wonder what they meant by this, if there's only my fighters and your fighters. It's because 2v2 they had that in mind, and they were like, people are playing in a multiplayer game, this will have new ramifications. And I'm glad that there is an attention to detail like that, because it makes the characters way more interesting when played in multiple formats. The next concept I want to talk about is kind of a little bit more abstract, but I think is super, I'm not going to do that bit again, is very important when thinking about how characters play, because, again, I want to hit this home. Certain characters that are absolutely busted in 1v1 are absolute poo-poo in 2v2 because of the way they play. And I think that comes down to this concept of tempo and value, which are classic kind of like card game terms that I'm going to give you like my personal definition, which might not be exactly right, but I think the idea still carries over. Basically, tempo is kind of like the momentum of the game. And in terms of Unmatched, I would like to kind of define that as like turn efficiency, being able to progress your game plan, basically killing the opponent in as few actions as possible. I say actions because that's not really the right word, but what I mean is being able to make the most out of all of your turns, essentially. So, for example, Madness Will Keep You Alive from Moon Knight. What it lets you do is, on your turn, let's say you maneuver, you can then play it to recover 2 health, and then because you started in a different turn, you gain an action. And then you can use the second action to maneuver again or attack. And so essentially this card is letting you achieve maximum tempo because you are moving, attacking, and healing all in the same turn. You're being very efficient, and you're doing as many things as possible in that set time frame of your turn. Think about like a Bruce Lee turn where you play all 6 Jeet Kune Do cards. That's a super efficient turn. Double attacks are another great tempo swing. Any like Sinbad's Riches Beyond Compare lets you draw 3 cards for 1 action. Anything that kind of compresses actions or multiple actions into just like singular ones is normally, in order to draw 3 cards, you have to maneuver 3 times, which is a turn and a half, and Riches Beyond Compare just crams that into 1 action. Things like that, things that give you a great amount of momentum, super efficient, those types of things, I feel, are super valuable in 2v2, where a lot is happening around you all at once, and you kind of need to be ahead of all of that if you don't want to get drowned in the tsunami. Value, which can be a lot better in 1v1, I say can because, well, let me just explain this first. I would say value is in Unmatched, the ability to maximize the utility of all of your resources, typically cards, but also like health and sidekicks. In other games, this basically is like card advantage. In Lorcana, if I kill... I'm trying to think of an example. If I just play like an overstated 2-drop, cough cough min snake cough cough, and that kills like your 1-drop and your 2-drop, I'm spending 1 card to get rid of 2 of your cards. That doesn't necessarily translate into Unmatched because like attacks and blocks are still like 1 for 1, but kind of can come across like that in terms of like clutching claws, making you block, and then you're also discarding a card. But I would just say like being able to maximize all of your stuff. And I'll talk about some examples of like what I would call value-oriented fighters in a second, but there are certain characters in 1v1 that like to play super greedy, typically slower characters that kind of run away, make you come at them, make you have to boost to reach them, make you discard some cards, can recur cards, can play like super big attacks that kind of take a while to set up. Those types of characters are a little less favorable in this format because of the absolute beatdown you can get thrown upon you, especially if you're getting ganged up on two of the other heroes on the opposing team. You don't have time to play super greedy. You can't hold on to your cards. You gotta play them. You gotta block. And so heroes that can play faster, can play more efficiently, that don't need to play the long game, that don't need to see a large majority of their deck in order to gain a large advantage over you. Tempo heroes, I feel, are a lot better in 2v2 than value greed-oriented heroes. So, for example, in terms of Madness Will Keep You Alive, I talked about how you can play this as a tempo card, where you can basically heal without like wasting quote-unquote inaction. You can also play this as a value card by not moving, and then you're playing a card, you're recovering 2 health, you're not gaining an action. So it's like you're drawing out the game, you're doing less on your turn, but that's intentional, either because it forces initiative on your opponent or you're using it as a pass to kind of put yourself ahead for exhaustion in the late game. But this is a very, very cool card because you can play it as either. It's one of the reasons that Moon Knight is such a cool character, is because you can play in a very tempo style, because you can kind of like push the limits of each of your hero ability, and you have cards that can be used in multiple ways, which is awesome. But you can also kind of lean in on that Khonshu ability and play a super greedy long game, and Madness Will Keep You Alive does let you play both depending on the matchup. Super cool card, super cool way to kind of think about the things. But let's give some examples of tempo and value heroes now. So some tempo heroes that I think are very good in 2v2 are T-Rex, Tesla, Strange, and Sinbad. There are, of course, many other examples, but I feel like these heroes kind of highlight it the best. T-Rex draws a card at the end of each of her turns. We already talked about how card draw is amazing in this format, but T-Rex, with the added draw she has, gets to attack more. And even though she doesn't really have great blocks, she has a bunch of health, which she can kind of utilize to not block and attack more. So she's going to be attacking a lot. She has a lot of attacks that draw her cards, like Commanding or When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth. She has cards that gain her actions, like Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth. Closer Than She Appears is also a great one. And she just has cards that let her do multiple things at the same time and keep attacking, keep the aggression on, which is great because then it allows her teammate to come in and clean up the scraps. Tesla is also fantastic at this. He has some great action compression. Both of his schemes gain him an action, which means he can play them and then do something else on his turn, which the schemes are very good, by the way. The global move of remote control, fantastic, although that is only opposing heroes, I should say. That is not necessarily Command the Storms, because Command the Storms is everyone. Remote control, I believe, is only opposing heroes. Things like the blue card that let him draw a bunch at once are phenomenal, and he has actions that let him do multiple things. What is it, 7 Hertz, I think? The gain an action and or draw a card. Actually, gain an action or gain an action, draw a card. Phenomenal. Death Ray, super big attack all at once. Lot of good blocks that allow him to do multiple things. So he's very flexible, very versatile, and if you can keep up your hand and manage your coils well, I feel like you can do a lot. Doctor Strange, very similar. The fact that he can utilize his ability every single time Strange plays a card, you're always keeping your hand up, you're always drawing, which means your opponent isn't running you out of blocks, and you can keep up with blocking and or attacking. Eye of Agamotto is also just like an amazing card, and you have a lot of good effects like the movement from wins, or the healing from rings that you're attacking and also like using more utility abilities. Fantastic in this mode. And Sinbad just super good at moving, super good at drawing. All of Sinbad's draw by Fortune and Fate, commanding impact. Riches Beyond Compare. A lot of card names in my head, but like those cards are fantastic in this mode. And Sinbad, his deck is very purple, meaning he can almost always block, which is absolutely phenomenal. So I think these are characters that kind of like highlight how tempo can be really good in 2v2. In terms of value-oriented heroes that are less good in 2v2, we have Sherlock, Dracula, Elektra, and Yenenga. So Sherlock, kind of a hero that needs to run away a lot, doesn't really do a lot of attacking, has some good blocks, but no draw, meaning he can get ran out of blocks, and folds to pressure. And if you're getting pressured by two heroes instead of one, you can fold a lot faster. His scheme damage is a lot less good, being split up over two bodies. And if you're just focusing on one of the enemy heroes, the other one kind of is unburdened by your shenanigans, and if left unchecked, can probably out-tempo you. Dracula, another hero that doesn't really have a lot of attacks. Yes, he has Beast Form, one of the best attacks in the game, but like you can hit him a bunch and he's not really going to hit you back that often. Yes, he's going to ping, and the draw and the damage is great, but besides the stuff that kind of needs to get like set up in advance, he's not really doing anything. Like in a battle of smacks, like you're probably going to be able to hit him more, especially with his limited blocks. And yes, all of his cards are good, but if you're just pressuring him a bunch, his sidekicks are really easy to kill, and then he loses out on some damage and stuff. So Elektra's kind of the same way, kind of like a setup hero. In 1v1, very oppressive because you can just run away, go through your whole deck, use Snake Root at opportune times, have 6 sidekicks per life with Hands of Red. But in a 2v2, besides your sidekicks taking up a large majority of the board, 4 of them, they can't really block that well. They have 2 3s in the entire deck, and Elektra doesn't have a lot of health to play with, and no card draw, I believe. So like, if both of the heroes on the other team are going for you, or just ignoring you and going for your teammate, like you can't really make as much of an impact as you would like. Yenenga, I will say, can play a mean tempo game. She has action gain, double attacks, but she has no draw. And a lot of times she needs to see a lot of her cards in order to make an impact. Because yes, while her cards are all very, very good and very strong, if you can't get to them consistently, if you're just pinned between 2 enemy heroes and just double maneuvering on your turns while they smack you, like they are going to kill you very quickly. So I hope this tempo versus value explanation kind of made a little bit more sense. How I tend to value more explosive, efficient heroes that can do a lot at once if necessary, versus value heroes that kind of like longer games and less explosive bursts from their opponents, because there can be a lot of that in 2v2, especially with 2 opposing enemies. And kind of like setup heroes tend to be less good because you have less setup time when there's more enemies. So I hope that all made sense. Let's quickly just highlight some of the heroes that I think are best in this format. We have Medusa, Bigfoot, InGen, Spike, Ghost Rider, T-Rex, the Genie, Strange, and Oda. So some of these we've already talked about, like Strange and T-Rex, but just to highlight kind of each individual hero and what makes them really good. Medusa, a lot of good blocks. Discards are a pain in the butt to deal with and one of the most lethal attacks in the entire game. Bigfoot has consistent blocks, consistent draw potentially, because he can use his ability he should be using his ability basically whenever possible, and consistent big attacks. InGen has unprecedented and unmatched, but board control with his traps, and range move 3 always helps. Spike, his card draw and kind of like camping out on the shadows playstyle doesn't really work when your opponent isn't forced to come to you, but with a teammate and with more people on the board, Spike kind of has to get a little bit more attention from the other team, in which case all of his cards get a lot better when they actually have effects. Definitely don't sleep on Spike in 2v2. Ghost Rider, the ability to move through people and deal them damage, is amazing when there's more targets on the board. Genie, unprecedented draw power, very tempo oriented with his ability and the wishes, just being able to do whatever you need them to do in this format, drawing or discarding. Phenomenal. And Oda, just read his ability card. So I would consider these 7 heroes probably the best bet in 2v2, but I would love to know if there's anyone else that I may have accidentally left out of this tier and who you think that is. So that's this intro video wrapped up. Kind of went through what makes the format different, how we have to evaluate heroes differently in this format, and some of the attributes and heroes that I value the most. Please let me know your thoughts on this, because as I said, I am not super experienced in the world of 2v2, and I would love to hear from some of you, especially if you were in Columbus, Ohio 2 weekends ago, about your thoughts and knowledge on 2v2 and where you would potentially like me to take this series, because there's a lot of 2v2 team comps I could talk about. So I could do something similar to what I do for Adventures, where I talk about specific hero pairings when dealing with the Adventures PvE mode. I could also do something like that for 2v2, make separate kind of strategy videos about 2v2, although I think that is probably a little too much overlap with the typical strategy guides that I put out, which I will be returning to, by the way. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. Anything and everything related to 2v2, any feedback would be awesome. And I hope you enjoyed watching this. And if you haven't played 2v2, please give it a try. Try to get together with some friends and just have a good time. It definitely is a format that I think is more enjoyable not taken as seriously, but that still doesn't mean there can't be some intense 2v2 games. Just one of my least favorite thing about playing an intense strategy game with 4 people is that it can take a while, and Unmatched, I feel like, is a game that is best when it does not overstay its welcome, which is personally why I don't really enjoy playing it online, but in person it can be a lot of fun. So yeah, those are just my initial thoughts on 2v2. I love you all, and I will see you tomorrow with a nice little update video. Woohoo! So thanks for watching, and as always, like, subscribe, and yay!